Welcome to Steve McDonald's Arts and Crafts. This is a video about all the things I hate that resin artists say. Number 7 is the one that I really get angry about, and I'll explain that when I get to number 7. So stick around and see what are these things that I hate. So number 1 is alcohol inks. So many resin artists use alcohol inks, and I have to say they do look beautiful in resin. Look, this is alcohol ink in resin. Looks beautiful. Colours are beautiful. But what they don't tell you is that alcohol inks, regardless of what resin you use, regardless if you put a UV protection in, because I use a 3 times UV protection resin, which is brilliant, by J Diction, these are going to fade. They're not colour fast at all. This is the second one of those 2 coasters that I made. Now, I did do a whole video on comparing these, and if you want to check that out, I will list it in the description below. This is what it looks like if it's not been covered up, and this is what it looks like if it's been kept covered up and in the dark. Look how that's faded. Don't you think your customers or you would be disappointed if you received that? So, I hate it when resin artists say, I use alcohol inks, they don't fade. The other one I really don't like is when they mention all resins are the same. And it's so not true. There's so many different types of resin out there. There's polyurethane resin, there's polyester resin, there's 5-minute epoxy, there's slow cure, there's thick resins, there's thin resins, there's 1-to-1, there's 2-to-1s. There is a plethora of resins out there, and all resins do different things. For example, I use a deep pour resin when I'm filling up a mould or something that needs to be poured deeper than about 1.5 centimetres. The reason is it cures slowly. And when it cures slowly, you're not going to get that flash curing, cracking, spoiling of your resin products. But what you will find is that this type of resin takes normally between 48 hours and 72 hours to cure. So it's important to choose the right resin for the right project. If I'm doing a picture pour, I'll use a thicker resin. Generally, I'll use this 4-hour demoulding resin. It's nice and thick. It's not likely to pour over the edges, and it gives a great result when doing picture pours or coating something. Brilliant for that. Brilliant for doming as well. If I'm just doing normal resin work, filling moulds, making jewellery and that sort of thing, I use a 1-to-1, 3 times UV Protect resin, either by J Diction or recently I found Tea Expert. It's brilliant. Make sure that you use the right resin for the right project and you'll get great results. So I hate it when they say, all resins are the same, because they're not. Because some resins will yellow really quickly, and other resins will take years to yellow. Here's an experiment I'm actually in the process of doing. So this video is coming out very soon. Now look at the I'm not going to tell you which ones it is. You'll see the video when it comes out. Look at the difference between those 2. There's a massive difference here. One's really yellow and went yellow really quickly, and the other one is still beautiful and clear. And believe it or not, this one created more bubbles than this one. And also, this is one of the most expensive resins on the market at the moment, and probably one of the most popular resins on the market. Just because it's expensive doesn't mean it's the best resin. Before I recommend any resin, I always do lots of tests. I don't just recommend it because I'm going to get a commission on it or an affiliate commission. I would never do that. If this company offered me £10,000 to do one video and recommend their resin, I wouldn't do it. It's not fair. This is another one of my pet peeves. Use a torch when you're getting rid of bubbles on a silicone mould. Absolute terrible advice, and it irritates me. I think in every single video I make, I always say use a long neck lighter. Now the reason is silicone is heat resistant. You can put it in the oven, but this torch burns at 1,000 times probably more higher temperature than this. This is not going to damage your mould. This is going to cause your resin to overheat, your mould to overheat, stick together, and I'm sure lots of people watching this have had that experience, because I know I have. And it just destroys the mould, destroys everything you're looking for. And if you've got an expensive mould like this one, this was an expensive mould, you're going to cry. I would cry. So all these resin artists or resin people that say use a torch, never use a torch on silicone molds. Use it if you've done a picture pour. If there's no silicone, that's absolutely fine. And of course, I use it for that. The other thing I really hate is when resin artists say never add more than between 5 and 10% of something into resin. This is true for the liquids or wettish things like resin pigments and resin colours and acrylic paint and all that sort of stuff, because that will affect the curing. Because it's a liquid, it's going to affect the consistency of the resin. But if it's a dry product, for instance, this I made using white sand and all these pieces of jewellery. Again, I'll link that video in the description below. This I made using sugar. Again, that's part of that video. I used 2 times the amount of sand to the amount of resin I had. Mixed it all up and it cures really hard. My goodness, this stuff is hard. That is not going to go anywhere. If it's a dry product like mica powder, but you don't want to be putting loads of mica powder in because you're just wasting that, because once you've got the colour, you've got the colour. Sands and things like that. Anything dry, you'll be fine. You can put as much in as you like. So it really annoys me, and I hate it when they say never put more than that in, you shouldn't put that amount in. You'll be fine. As long as it's dry. This one's a doozy, and it's expensive. You must buy a vacuum chamber and a pressure pot. Now, if you're a crafter and you're making small pieces and you mix your resin up properly, and I will link a video in the description below about how to mix resin properly without getting bubbles, you don't need to invest $300 or £300 on a pressure pot. They are nice to have, and I do have one, and if I'm making something that's quite large with a resin that's going to cure fairly quickly, I will pop it in my pressure pot. But usually I use it about twice a year, no more. And they're really expensive. A vacuum chamber is not going to reduce the bubbles in your resin piece. What it's going to do is suck all the bubbles out once you've mixed it, but that can also cause problems and flowing over of resin. But once you pour it, and if you add more bubbles in that way, that vacuum chamber then hasn't really been any use. I don't have a vacuum chamber and I really don't miss it. I know a lot of people use it. They're brilliant if you want to seal wood and things like that. I mean, absolute must for that sort of stuff, because you can put wood into some liquid resin, put it in the vacuum chamber, it will suck it all into that wood, then take it out, let it cure up. Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt, it's all nice and sealed. But unless you're going to be doing a lot of that, don't invest in these things, because they're really, really not needed. You can actually do resin with a few silicone moulds and the resin, and enjoy it and have fun. This is the penultimate one. The biggie's coming up in a second. It's absolutely fine to put fresh flowers into resin. Oh my God, this annoys me so much. You cannot put fresh flowers in resin and expect them to look nice within a week. It just isn't going to happen. Firstly, those flowers are going to start to break up after a little while. Secondly, they're probably going to rot because there's bacteria in there and moisture in there. And they're just going to look horrible. Again, I've done videos on all these things. I will link that video in the description below. So if you want to check it out, where I do a comparison of a dried flower and a fresh flower, and you will be shocked at the difference in it. Honestly, you will not believe how different they look. There's lots of videos out there that say, yeah, you can do it. And they do look beautiful sometimes within that shot, because that's probably been shot that same day. But you go back to that a week later, it's going to look... And again, if you're selling your stuff, people are going to be really unhappy. You don't want unhappy customers, you want great repeat customers. Now this is number 7, and this is the absolutely most important one, and it's the one that really drives me mad. I have sent messages to people saying, please don't give this advice. I've also stopped following people and all sorts of things because it's dangerous. And that is those resin artists who believe it's fine to do resin without PPE. Now, at the bare minimum, you need eye protection, a good mask that filters out any vapours, and nitrile gloves. These are an absolute must. When you're first using resin, and I'm a victim of this, when I first used resin many years ago, I wasn't given the advice that I should be given. I didn't wear any PPE, and I was fine for about 2 years. After 2 years, I started to feel really unwell, and I started to feel fluey, my skin, all got dermatitis really bad, all my hands cracked, I had to use steroids to clear it all up. It's because I developed an allergic reaction to resin, and as a result I became really sensitive to it, and I'm still sensitive to it. I have an amazing extractor fan in my resin studio. I don't do any other arts and crafts in this studio. My pets aren't allowed in this studio. And I never mix or use resin without this full mask, which I change the filters on quite often. And they've also got carbon filters attached to it. Eye protection as well. And you've probably seen this pop up in my videos. But how many videos do you see where the person isn't wearing any eye protection, they're not wearing any mask, they're doing it all without gloves? It is so dangerous. Always work in a well ventilated room, always wear PPE, and always change your clothes when you go in the house and have a shower, because that's what I do, because the fumes can stick to your clothes. I also always, when I'm using resin, and probably you've seen me do it before, is wear gloves that I often put an elastic band around the sleeves, and long sleeve shirts, shoes and long trousers, just for safety. And now I very rarely have a problem. The reason I hate this is because I made a video on this a couple of years ago, my worst performing video I've ever made. And I think, are people just not interested in it? And it is because I think that they take it for granted that they're going to be fine, and they're fine at the moment. They see so many resin artists on YouTube who are coming across as being really professional and really knowledgeable, who aren't using it, so they don't realise or don't think that they need it. But you do, right from the very beginning. Please, 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 if you don't know anything else, for me, wear PPE. I will link everything that I've talked about in the description below today, so if you want to get hold of it, then you can. There is a warning at the bottom of every single one of my videos about PPE as well, and about how important it is. I love resin. I love playing with resin. I love making stuff. I love selling it. I make a decent living out of it as well, thanks to all the people that support my channel, my members, and those of you that buy me a coffee. If you found this video useful and helpful and you want to get into resin, then please make sure that you follow the tips that I've given. There are lots more, and I may make another video on this sort of thing in a few months' time. But these are the ones that really rattle my cage. And I just needed to address them because I've recently seen too many videos with this sort of stuff not being talked about and not being done. If you've enjoyed this video and you found it useful, and you'd like to buy me a coffee, the link for that is in the description below. It's really appreciated. Links for everything else as well, and lots of other information are in the description below, including the videos that I talked about. Check out the video that's coming up next, and I will link the PPE one up there, and I'm hoping it gets a few more views now, because it's really, really important. It goes into a little bit more depth. Take care, enjoy your resin, be safe, bye.